If you're in a marriage where your spouse has told you they're just not in love with you anymore, or maybe you're that spouse who is just feeling like you're not in love anymore in the relationship, that can be a pretty hopeless place to be. So here's the good news today. Number one, you're not alone. You're not the first person who's felt that. And number two, your feelings right now do not mean there's no hope and there's no future for the relationship. So in today's video, I want to talk about 3 questions that you can use to evaluate how you got here and to reconnect again in the relationship. And if you're here today and your relationship is great, then guess what? These 3 questions just might be the thing to prevent you from finding yourself in a loveless marriage somewhere down the road. That's what we're going to talk about today on Relationshots. Welcome to Relationshots. My name's Eric Wooten. If this is your first time hanging out with us, welcome to the place to get practical relationship advice that actually works in your relationship. If you haven't already done so, click the subscribe button and the bell notification so you don't miss any upcoming videos. And if you want a free guide to intimacy, use the link below in the description area to download that free guide. So, if you either are the spouse who finds themselves in a relationship where they don't feel like they're in love, or your spouse has said to you, I'm just not in love with you anymore, that can feel pretty hopeless. It can also feel like there's no hope of ever returning or getting back to where you want to be, but I'm telling you, that's just not true. In my time working with thousands of couples, I've found many couples who are just in the same place you are, who have been able to restore, reconnect, and would now say they have fantastic marriages. And so what I've identified over the years working with couples is what I want to share today, which are just 3 simple questions to help evaluate how you got here, which in turn will help you evaluate how to get out of this place and reconnect in your relationship. So number one you want to ask yourself is, what did we stop doing? Now I'm making an assumption here that in the beginning of the relationship, you and your spouse were doing things for one another that actually made you fall in love, feel in love, and want to get married. If you weren't doing those things, you probably wouldn't have been interested in marrying this person. So what were those things you were doing that you've now stopped doing in the relationship? What happens a lot of times in relationships is when things are going well, we don't take the time to evaluate what are we doing to keep us in a great place, and then eventually those things begin to die off or fade away. So you need to ask yourself, what am I not doing that I used to be doing in the relationship that kept me feeling in love with that person? So when you're evaluating this question, you need to be thinking about things like their love languages, if you're familiar with that, or their top emotional needs. Basically, what are the things that when you do them for your spouse, that makes your spouse feel cared for, feel loved, feel validated, feel connected to you. And we've talked about some of these things before in past videos of what are the top emotional needs. And then once I know what those are, how do I walk out interacting with them daily, weekly, monthly in those areas? So if you don't even know where to start, I would suggest sit down with your spouse, ask them the simple question. Hey, what are some things that are missing in our relationship right now that you desire to make you feel connected and want to spend time with me? And then just listen. This is not the time to argue about, well, you think you're doing those. Listen, if they're telling you they think they're missing, in their mind they're missing, and you've got to figure out what it looks like to begin implementing those things again. Once you find those out, all you need to do is plan some intentional time to connect in the areas that they've shared with you so that the two of you can begin reconnecting in the relationship. Now, feelings don't change overnight, so sometimes you have to do the things you know are the right things to do, even if you don't feel like it, knowing that the feelings will follow the right actions down the road. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what have we stopped doing? The next question you have to ask yourself is, what is preventing connection? So in the last question, we talked about what are some things you want to start doing in the relationship. This question is really asking, what are the things in the relationship that are causing us not to want to connect? What are the things going on that are serving as a barrier for your spouse to want to connect with you or for you to want to connect with your spouse? And now every relationship is different. Every person is different. So these could be a million different things depending on who you are, what you desire, and the dynamics in your relationship. But you've got to identify, Are there some things going on that you're doing or that they're doing that is making the other person say, you know what, it's just not worth my time and energy to try to connect in the relationship. And so instead of trying to connect, we just begin getting busy doing other things. And that's what causes us to fade apart and feel like we're no longer in love together. So as I said, this is going to be unique to you and your relationship, but some examples might be one, unresolved conflict. So if there's tension in the relationship, especially if you're married to or you're a conflict avoider, then there's tension and conflict. You're not going to want to connect. They're not going to want to connect with you. And so that unresolved conflict over time can eventually make a spouse feel like, listen, we have this conflict. I've voiced what I need to have happen. It's not being resolved. So I don't ever see a place in the future where this issue gets resolved. And for that reason, I'm just not sure I want to stay in this relationship. So one thing could be unresolved conflict. Another one could just be emotional outburst or hurt. So one of you has explosions. Maybe it's cursing, maybe it's yelling, some type of emotional abuse. But that hurt over time can make you or your spouse feel like, you know what, I just don't want to engage in this relationship. It's not worth the energy to engage in the relationship, and we can pull away. Another one might be rejection. Maybe your spouse feels like every time they come to you with whatever they come, they get criticism or some type of rejection in the relationship. And so they go, you know what, it's just easier not to come because I don't like those feelings of rejection. I may not feel connected, but you know what? Not feeling connected is not as painful as trying to connect and continually experiencing rejection. Those are just a few. There could be many more, but you have to identify what are the things in your relationship that, although you may be trying the right things that we discovered in question 1, these things in question 2 are preventing us from, they're serving as barriers. And so what can happen is you can be spending a lot of energy doing the things on question 1, but it ends up being 1 step forward, 2 steps back every time there's rejection or a loud outburst or an emotional attack or something else. So if you don't know what those are, ask your spouse. Say, hey, are there things that I do in the relationship that make it difficult for you to connect with me, or make it so it's just not worth you spending the energy trying to connect with me? And again, listen. Don't tell them that's not the case. Don't tell them that's not how you see it. Just listen to what they say and see how can I eliminate those things. Maybe an apology needs to be made and a commitment to try to work on those in the future. But you've got to discover not only what do we need to start doing again, but what are the things preventing connection that we need to eliminate. And the third question you need to ask yourself is there a third party? Now, this could be a person, but this can also be comparison. So stay with me for a minute. Comparison is the greatest relationship killer. So there may be another person in your spouse's life that they're connecting with emotionally, possibly even physically, but as long as there's another relationship that they're able to compare the marriage to, that's a game that the marriage will never win. I probably need to do a whole video on just this topic, but a marriage can never compare to an affair because the affair is only the fun part of the relationship. They don't have to deal with any of the headache, any of the parenting, any of the finances stuff. So even if it's just an emotional connection, it's going to be an easier route for your spouse to connect with somebody else because they're not going to get any criticism, no pushback. The other person can be fully supportive because they really have no skin in the ultimate game of this marriage relationship. So if there's a third person, that's going to prevent you guys from connecting, and that may need to be cut off. But even if it's not another person, if you or your spouse are comparing your marriage to somebody else's marriage, that's a setup for disaster as well. Listen, every relationship is different. And usually what you're doing is you're comparing the highlight reel from some other relationship to your locker room or back end reel. And those two you don't really know what's going on in that other relationship. You don't know the highs and lows that they have. All you're seeing is the highs and saying, man, I wish I had that, without knowing the negatives that come on the other side of that coin. So comparing yourself either to another person, comparing your spouse to that person, or comparing yourselves as a couple to another relationship is always going to put you in a place of hopelessness and feeling like, man, this isn't going to work. I just don't think I'm in love here anymore, and I just don't know how to walk this out. So there's 3 quick questions. What have we stopped doing? what's preventing connection, and is there a third party that will help you evaluate, how did we get to a place where either your spouse has said, I'm not in love with you, or you're feeling like I'm just not in love with them. You need to evaluate how you got here, and those are the steps that will help you get out of this place and reconnect together. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Let's have a discussion about this. And maybe there's some other evaluative questions that you've discovered that can help the rest of us in the community. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and I'll see you right here next time on Relation Shots.